Hello, and thank you for deciding to join another episode of Let's Chat About Aging in Your Community, brought to you by CHATS, Community and Home Assistance to Seniors. My name is Christina Bizance, and I am so excited and delighted to have a special guest with us on this episode, Laura Tamblyn Watts. Laura is somebody that I've come to know over the last while, and am just so impressed by her passion, her commitment, and dedication to all things aging and helping people age appropriately and age well in our country. Laura is the CEO of CanAge, which is Canada's national seniors advocacy organization. She teaches law and aging at the University of Toronto and has worked as a lawyer defending the rights of older people for more than 25 years. Laura is also a regular media guest and keynote speaker on aging issues and the recipient of numerous Canadian and international awards for her work. And as a matter of fact, her new book, Let's Talk About Aging Parents, is an international #1 bestseller and has been translated into more than 7 languages. Laura, welcome to our podcast today.
Well, I'm delighted to be here and so thrilled to have this conversation.
So I'm really interested in talking a little bit about CanAge, because I'm not sure that everybody is quite familiar with the organization and why you started it up. And interestingly enough, you started it in 2019, I understand, which who knew that several months later, we'd be in the midst of an unprecedented pandemic that had a particularly negative impact on older adults across the country. So tell me a little bit about why and how you started the organization, and where it's evolved to from the initial intent.
So I like a discount as much, maybe more than other people. I'm the first person there, and I'm checking to see when I can get that 55 discount. I can't quite get it yet, but it's only about a year away. And I'm a big fan of community-based organizations coming together. We wanted to not do either of those things, right? Happy organizations are out providing discounts and so on. That's great. Really incredibly happy that we have community-based organizations working on the ground to lift up the voices of older people and to provide the connection. What we felt had been missing for a long time in our country is that pan-Canadian partner that is really just focused on making sure that the voices of folks at the ground levels who are really doing the work get up high to the folks at typically the federal level, but it could be the international level, and that vice versa. The stuff at the sitting up there gets its way down and meshes with the people who need to know things the most. And that anyone could join, that it wasn't going to cost you anything, that you didn't need a credit card, and you didn't need to worry that the organization was going to be in conflict with something else that you were doing. That was the gap that we saw. And most countries have an organization like that. In the UK, it's called Age UK, AARP in the United States, or, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, France, and so on. And they also tend to be that academic partner too, because so many of the things that we need involve new research, right? We're always wanting to say we need more research, better research, make sure that older people are involved in the research, not just having it against us. But we didn't really have that pan-Canadian organization that was involved. So we started it. Instead of complaining about it, we've been, lamenting for many years that it didn't exist. And in 2019, my dear friend Jana Ray and I sat down and said, okay, well, we've done all these things before. What if we stopped and just started an organization from scratch? Now, as you say, 2019, we did what we called a sort of a soft launch. We were doing things, we were engaged in whatever else. But boy, let me tell you, 2020 and onwards was about as hard and fast as anyone can get.
Yeah. And I remember seeing you on a number of broadcasts and media interviews and so forth. And I thought, oh, who is this CanAge organization? Because although we're a regional organization providing community-based support to seniors, we're kind of aware of who else is out there, and particularly from an advocacy standpoint. So, it's quite fascinating to see, just how much the organization grew and grew in terms of profile as well. You really served as an advocate for older adults, as I said, in that terrible, terrible time
Oh,
that.
it was hard to explain to people. And if we look back, I think there's two kinds of folks, right? There's the folks that weren't able to do what they would ordinarily be doing, literally kind of sitting on their hands because they were stopped from opening their store, they were stopped from going to their work, they lost their jobs. And then there's the other folks that were never busier than they'd ever been before. Everyone who works in the senior level at CanAge had worked for more than decades in the field of seniors and seniors issues and seniors advocacy. So none of us were new to it,
Mhm.
but it was nice to have a focus point where we could rally and be there to exchange information and, have uh, kind of an umbrella, if you will, so that people could speak to. No, we were doing, in some cases, just media. 25, I remember one, I think we did 30 interviews in a day. But it wasn't just that, it was trying to make sure, because things were changing so fast, Christy. Do you remember? Like, it's just so incredibly, and you might get your head around what was happening in your local city or your region or your rural municipality area, or maybe even you get your head around what's happening in your province. But Canada is big and varied, and trying to make sure that the right information was going to the right place and that you could compare. People say, oh, you can't go in to a long-term care home. Of course, you just can't do it. And we're saying, well, yes, you can. I mean, British Columbia does it. But what they do is make sure that they have personal protective equipment or that they have testing. And being able to make sure that we were able to say, let's make sure that we're learning as fast as we're doing.
Mhm. Yeah. And I know, just even speaking from Chat's perspective, we were having to learn every day. And, when it came to sort of the pecking order of who got access to PPE protective equipment, we were way down on the list, and yet we had staff going into people's homes. They had to, and we were still running programs for seniors, and protecting the staff and protecting our clients was quite a challenge.
And we saw in microcosm, in a very pressured microcosm, what people think is important. And I
Hmm.
think that we have to talk about that. We have to talk about the fact that we didn't think that older people are important. And in many cases, we didn't think that people who work with or for or support older people were that important. I'm not talking it in a flippant way. I'm not trying to be cute about it or dismissive
Hmm.
about it. If you just think about April. So, just think about April 2020, end of March 2020. We had lots of personal protective equipment in Ontario, and it was all in hospitals. Now, I'm not saying hospitals aren't important. Hospitals are very important, but they were literally, in some cases, locked up in closets.
Yes. Yeah.
And I remember we created something called OSCAR, the Ontario Seniors Care and Assistance Roundtable. We were just saying the CEOs of every organization that's working provincially, we're going to get together once a week and have these conversations. And we all ended up kind of throwing our hands up because acute care got everything. And we kept saying that's actually not where the biggest danger is. The biggest danger is in the home or in a long-term care home or a congregate care setting. We actually, I'll never forget this, in the end of March, we put out in Ontario an open call to support long-term care homes. And you know who helped us? The manicurists and the hair salons and the beauticians. They were the ones who got in their cars and dropped off the personal protective equipment of their gloves and masks because they were doing acrylic nails or, hair or whatever it was. And they were literally the ones that kept long-term care homes safe while we had personal protective equipment stockpiled or sometimes even out of date in Ontario and actually in other jurisdictions as well. And we don't tell those stories. It was actually the community small business people, often women, who were literally going through their houses and giving everything they could.
Wow.
And we remember also that at the very high level, I mean, that's what we talk about local community stuff. At the very high level, we're talking about the international global analysis of it. Canada was the worst in G20 countries for outcomes of seniors. We had the highest mortality rates for seniors. Like, we were worse than countries that you think, really? We were the worst. And it's because we did not attend to people, particularly who need home care, in sort of assisted living, retirement living, and especially in long-term care. And our triage were, I remember called my parents. They were in their mid-80s at that time. I called them up and I said, listen, I have to tell you something really serious. If you get this, nobody is treating you.
Wow.
Because your triage rates are 70. No one's treating you. You're 85. If you get this, you're probably going to be let to die. And I remember having to say that to my parents, and it really took them aback. And then we had to deal with the social isolation on the other end of it, because we told everybody, like, don't see anyone and stay home. And the downflow effect of the social isolation and that being pulled apart from our community connections is something I don't think we're going to get over for a generation.
Yeah. I think the books are yet to be written on the lessons learned and the experiences of that 4-year, 5-year time frame, which I'd like to talk about your book.
Sure.
Let's
wrote it during COVID. I did actually. I wrote it during COVID. I didn't actually want to write a book, Christina. People say, well, how do you want to write a book? I'm like, I didn't want to write a book. Right? It's long. It's difficult. It takes a long time to do. But I wanted to have a book. I wanted to have the book to hand over and say, here's a handbook. Like, here's a funny, I hope it's funny, kind of, but practical kind of girlfriend's guide of things you can do with just-in-time information. If you're up at 3 a.m. and you're trying to figure out, how do I know if my dad's got dementia? Or how do I take the car keys away? Or what is retirement home? Like, how do I shop for that? Like, I want people to have it. And in the end, I just, I thought, okay, if I could give something back, it's like the hacks of 25 years of knowledge. And that's what I tried to put in a book, and not like one caregiver's journey with these hands. That's nice. People actually need solutions to problems.
Yes. And, my copy is getting very dog-eared, and, I keep going back and reading something and highlighting and everything else. It's, I don't have aging parents. I don't have parents. Unfortunately, I lost both my parents, when they were quite young. But now, my cohort of friends, they're experiencing, not just parents, but siblings who are spouses. And I'm reading this book thinking, I have one son, only one child, and I'm thinking, how do I get this on his nightstand so he reads it? And because I'm sure he's like completely oblivious to any of these issues or having to worry about it, right? But it is so helpful. And what I love is you put it in layman's terms, because I think that too often we get bombarded with all of these technical terms, healthcare speak, and we really need to communicate in a way that people can appreciate what supports are there, or how to approach those difficult conversations.
How to approach it. It's as much how do you do it as what do you do. And I wanted to kind of put almost a subtitle under the book called Beyond Eat Right and Exercise, because I don't know one more person that needs to tell me that I need to eat right and exercise. Oh, and sleep more. Yeah, okay. Well, I'll add that to my list. I mean, I think it's not that we don't understand these things. It's like, how do we actually do this? I've got a PowerPoint presentation due tomorrow. 3 kids to get to soccer, baseball, hockey, ballet, 3 different schools. My partner is, traveling and trying to run his business. I have my aging parents, but I have my older brother too, who's got some, issues, as we all do, but his are specific. And, we got that one uncle that you don't really like very much, but somehow you have to deal with it. And I mean, I start off the whole first chapter starts off with kind of decrying the title, right? Which is, let's talk about aging parents, right? And it's really, actually, it's about everybody. It's about yourself. It's about your partner. It's about your built family. It's about your neighbors. It's about anyone that you are either in a relationship to or feel like you probably should be in a relationship to. And it's not nicey. I don't know who, when I read so many of the books and things over 25 years, I don't know who these families are. I've never met one, right? I believe it to Beaver families, that sort of everyone loves each other and you all sit down to dinner at 6 p.m. and, and everyone, is excited to see each other and has lots of time and no conflicts and no mental health issues and no one's drinking after 2. And I don't know these people, right? And I think that's important to call out. And Christina, you've been working in this field for such a long time as well.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know these perfect people? What I know is that people are people and they just try to make do, and they got to figure out, what is it that I have to do right now? What can I kind of lean towards? And what are the ways to have these conversations? Because the conversation I'm going to have with my dad is not the same conversation I'm going to have with my mother, even though I want to get to the right place, because they're completely different people. And what are some of those hacks? And then, calling out as well some of those fears that we have, right? Like, what keeps you scared? And I don't know about you, but there's a long list of things that keep me scared. And it's not just ending up in long-term care. There's a laundry list of things. So how do we get that both information, but have these conversations, or even don't have the conversations, but do things in a way that gets you where you need to be and still get invited for Thanksgiving dinner or lets you not go to Thanksgiving dinner if you really actually, maybe you shouldn't go to Thanksgiving dinner,
Yeah.
and be okay with that also.
Yeah. I do a lot of talks for different organizations, and I remember initially going into some groups, and I'm looking at the audience, and they're all people under 40 or in their early 40s, and they're looking at me thinking, why is this lady coming in to talk about retirement homes or how to plan for assisting aging parents or care, that sort of thing. And so I started to think, okay, they may not relate to me as an older adult or even to their parents, but they are starting to relate to the challenges of caregiving or facing, suddenly I'm going to have to do more, or I am doing more. As you said, maybe it's your mom, your dad, or the uncle that you don't like terribly much, but having to face that. So when I started to position things from the standpoint of, if you're not a caregiver, you're likely going to be one in the not too distant future. And here are some of the things that you might want to think about. And so I think that's why your book is so on point and helpful to people.
And there's an entire chapter on guilt, by the way, right? Because the reality of the circumstance is, we are not these sort of perfect human beings. Do I worry that my parents shouldn't be driving? Yes, I do. My parents are 88, Am I deeply grateful my parents are still driving? Yes, because as soon as they're not driving, there's no transit really where they are. They're not going to have an Uber. And I live an hour and a half away and I travel with work. My life is going to change dramatically. My life is going to change dramatically when they don't or can't drive anymore. And I know that, right? And my brother, who lives closer to them, but is less likely because of his work and because of, who we are and whatever else, is probably less likely to do the day-to-day stuff. So how do we confront the reality that, I also want to keep some things going longer because it's going to dramatically change my life? Or, do I really want to go home every Sunday? Well, I'm not talking about me, mom, dad. I'd love to see you on Sunday, but they don't necessarily want me there either because they want to live their life. How do we kind of bump into each other? And Christina, have you ever heard the phrase? This will ask me. You become the parent to your parent. Remember that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You do not become the parent to your parent. Actually, it's nonsense. You are still the kid. They probably think you're kind of stupid too, right? Like I mean that in a loving way. I have 3 kids, and I adore them, and I think they're all a little bit kind of daft because they can't put their shoes away and they don't know where the laundry is apparently, and you're going to crash the car, and how, like, these are the things that we think about. And I am in a relationship of some respect, control, history, cultural norms play a huge role in this. So you have to kind of figure out where dependencies are, and this notion that, you're either completely independent or you're completely dependent has to be blown up too. No one is completely independent or completely dependent, right? There's just this sort of cost benefit analysis, or what can you do? So the whole first quarter of the book is kind of going through, what does it look like to age in place, and what's the right place? What are some of the tasks and skills that people need to do? Mowing the lawn, walking the dog, right on up to, do you have to renovate your house, or do you need to move into some other type of congregate care? But you have to kind of break it down into chunks where actually people can understand where our cost benefit analysis, and then understand that if a person has become mentally capable of making choices that maybe you don't wish they would make, but they're allowed to make it, that gray zone of discomfort is real and funny. Your parents may not do what you want them to do, and that's probably just how it is. And on the whole, probably you don't do things your parents would like you to do, or everyone would be a doctor.
Yeah. And speaking of professions, by profession, you're a lawyer.
Mhm.
What are some of the things that you find are most vexatious when we're looking at legal situations for older adults?
I'd say there's 3 big areas. The first one's really obvious, right? It's that, what do you do when someone can't decide, and who decides? Right. So I shouldn't say I'm not so worried about wills. I am, right? I care what happens when you die, what happens to your stuff. But I kind of don't care so much because the person's dead. It does matter as well because people are worried about that. They're informed by that thinking when you're still alive. So there's the whole pressure points about who gets what, how, and so on and so forth. But I always figure, the person's dead. There's a default system in every province and territory about what happens to your stuff. It's a pain. Get a will. Don't get me wrong. Really get a will. It's a giant pain if you don't.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a system. What I am so much worried about now is when that person has mental incapacity but is still alive. So that the traditional, very robustly managing a condition like dementia. So I'm not just talking about, forgetting some nouns or don't know where your car keys are. I'm really talking about that.
Yeah.
Or you've been bonked on the head and you're in a coma, if you want to make it kind of black and white. And every province and territory's got a default for who can make individual decisions about your body for health, right? If you're really scraped off a road, you're brought into hospital, you're stabilized from an emergency, there's a default. And it's kind of who you'd expect, but it's different in every province. It goes to maybe your spouse partner first, although how long that person has to be in your life and what the qualifications are, not always the same. And then it kind of goes usually to adult children or parents, and it kind of goes down that list. Some of them are a little bit different. British Columbia has one with grandparents and grandchildren specifically named, and a close friend. They're probably the best on that. But there's no default list for finance, for property in any jurisdiction. It goes to the public guardian trustee. So I don't know about you, but like when I set up utilities and stuff at the house, it was sort of whoever was around. I set up the cable and the internet, and my husband set up the utilities, and you know what I mean? Like we didn't sit down and think, okay, your name's going to be on the phone bill. No, we just sat things up. And the houses, I think, in joint names, you think, well, maybe, but how do I pay the mortgage?
Yeah.
All of those things, you don't just get to pay it, right? And this is true for your mom or your dad or your next door neighbor. Anyway, if you do not have a power of attorney for property that continues on into incapacity, you can't pay for stuff, and you can't move money. It goes to the public guardian trustee. People do not understand that. So the who gets to decide question is real. The second ones and third ones are kind of easier in some way. It's what is the emotional stuff that goes beyond who gets to decide that ends up legal, right? So people say, well, I don't want to pick this person because other person's going to feel left out. And it's those emotional things. Well, can I pick all 8 of my kids to be my attorneys for my personal care or my body? Yeah, you shouldn't though, right? And so it's these emotional pieces that I really worry about that isn't really about the legal system, but it's about, and that usually makes people not do something is because they're worried about the emotional. So that's vexatious in this kind of situation. The third piece is fundamentally, how do you deal with administration? And we have a lot of red tape. And we ask a lot of our long-term care homes, our retirement homes. We ask a lot of home care. There's a lot of forms. And often the companies don't necessarily know how to do things, and we don't know how to. So we enter into these kinds of sign your life away, and you don't actually realize that there's legal things associated with that. And that really worries me because people can get into agreements or think things are covered and they're not.
Yeah, well, that's a lot to think about, and
Ask me the law question.
With the population aging so quickly, there's going to be, and we all know the impact of the baby boomers on so many facets of life that, that's a lot of people who are going to be going through many of these issues and having to deal with them, whether you're the person looking after the caregiver or the individual yourself. So
absolutely. And when the things go wrong is as important as what do I do to plan? Because just because you plan doesn't mean it's all going to work out perfectly. One of the things I also want people to remember is people don't we either become mentally incapable or die in some kind of clean order. Well, I'm going to pick my whatever. Well, they I was telling a story not that long to some of your team where I had a 95-year-old guy that I had to call up to make a decision for his 72-year-old son because his 72-year-old son was in ill health and had dementia. And the 95-year-old guy was, doing fine. He's 95, but on the whole, he's doing fine. And so I don't think that the son at 72 would have imagined that dad needs to make his decisions at 95, right?
Right.
So it's important to remember that, I think, well, my kids are going to do whatever. So I always try to take age out of it, although it's always around. Okay. And I try, some of the tips and hacks are like, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? What is it that we're scared of or worried about happening? And what if we didn't talk about being old or having dementia, which are the biggest fear markers, right? What if you said, oh, Dad, you're going on that amazing trip to New Zealand where you're going hiking up this and you're going to go on the Lord of the Rings tour and whatever else. But what if someone needs to pay your insurance while you're gone? What if you broke your leg there and I needed to get you home, right? So now we're talking about meeting the person where they are in their active, fun environment, but we have a take care of it situation. And I often think about those forms that I used to have to sign when my kids were going on school trips, right? If you can't get a hold of me or if something goes wrong, call this person. If you can't get a hold of me, call this person. And framing it in that just in case, understanding the seriousness of what we're asking for the cases, but it helps it take it away. And so that's that idea that if you're over the age of majority, you should have this stuff the same way that you need a bank account, the same way that you need a driver's license. It untethers it from the fear.
Yeah. Oh, very, very good points and things that people aren't thinking about and really need to start addressing and thinking. Boy, our time has gone really fast, and I want to give you an opportunity to let people know how they can get a copy of the book. Let's talk about aging parents, which is kind of close to the title of our podcast, but I assure you we didn't plagiarize.
Well, I think it's perfect. It means we're thinking about the same thing.
That's right. Yeah. So how can people get a copy of the book?
Anywhere. It's all the bookstores. So if you're in Canada, any of your local bookstore, independent bookstore or Indigo or whatever, my husband runs a company called Kobo, the ebook company. He'll remind you can get it there as well. Another thing that's really nice is you can get it on audiobook and you can borrow from the library as well and electronic. A lot of people have been buying, one for me and one for my 4 siblings and kind of using it as a way to break the ice and not make it a power and control issue. So it's like, I know that you don't come from Calgary every single weekend, Susan, but here's the list of things that maybe need to get done and how can we break them apart? So instead of making it confronting between this person and that person or all of us, it's nice to have a thing that's more neutral and you could kind of point to it going, oh, I was reading chapter 9 and it was saying that. And I thought, oh, right. And so that's the idea. And I had expected that. I had expected that people, kind of the adult kids or people who are fitting in their middle years would do it. What I had not appreciated, and it's kind of fun, is that many, many older people, like 75 to 105, are buying it and putting tape flags in section and handing it to everyone they know. And I thought that's kind of great. But yes, you can get it anywhere that you get your books. And the audiobook is sometimes great because people don't always have a lot of time, and you can be driving your car and listen to the audiobook. The other thing I just want to say is you do not need to start at the beginning and read it through. If you need to know about what to do driving, it's the last chapter, it's chapter 27. If you need to know about guilt, it's that chapter. If you need to know about a checklist to aging in place or how to make sure that your home is more safe or age friendly, start at that chapter. And literally it could be by your bedside and open it up. Just to close, I'll say the working name of my book was the 3 a.m. Guide to Your Aging Parents, because a lot of us are up at 3 a.m. kind of worrying about it, and that usually doesn't help with the eat right, exercise, and get a lot of sleep. But the idea was maybe when you wake up in a fit, or you're still up because you're trying to get that PowerPoint presentation, or your dad has called you and said that mom has fallen, you can just go to your bedside, open the thing you need, get the information, laugh a little bit, right? You need a little humor, laugh a little bit, close the thing and think, okay, onwards.
Wonderful. Great advice. A great book. I can tell you that I've done the same thing, 3 o'clock in the morning, and there is humor, but it's also very practical and things that we do need to think about if we are going to be able to age well and age in place and age with dignity.
And I was fixing my parents' technology and just about to lose my mind. And I thought, oh God, someone should write a book. And I thought, wait, I wrote a book. And I grabbed my book and I opened a section on technology. And I thought, oh, this is pretty handy. So I have to tell you, like, I actually used the book myself, and it maybe saved my relationship for Sunday dinner. And we got the internet working again.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura, for taking the time to be with us today, to have this chat about aging, and also for taking the time to write the book for all of those other older adults and caregivers out there who are really going to benefit from the information and the kinds of things we need to be thinking about and talking about. So really appreciate you being here. And to all of you who took the time to decide to listen in or watch this podcast, we're grateful to you as well. Thanks for joining this chat about aging in the community and working together to ensure that older adults have the ability to age with dignity, age with choice, and age in their communities. See you next time.